Okay, so here's the project page from Studio One Pro, which is where you can do your mastering. Now, the first thing I want to say is that I am not a mastering engineer. I'm not a mastering expert. I much prefer to have my stuff mastered by a proper professional who knows what he's doing, who's got the right equipment, who's got his room treated properly. I don't really have any of that. So this is really just to get my sound a sort of rough master. And what you can do is you can then send that rough master off to a mastering engineer along with the original audio, the unmastered file, and say, I'd like it to sound a bit like this, but better. Anyway, so this is what I do. So the another important thing to say is that you can't fix issues. Most of the issues you'll need to fix with a track need to be done during the mixdown phase, not at the mastering phase. So when I did my car test before by bouncing a track down, mastering it, and then going listening to it in the car, when I went back to fix the problems, which were sort of the bass was just too much, the stereo bass, and it was also too boomy, then I did that in the mixdown phase. You can't do that in the mastering phase. So what I do is the first thing I bring up is an EQ. So this is my mastering chain here. I've only got 4 plugins in the chain. This does change between tracks, but this is what I did on this one. So here's my mastering chain. The first thing is the Oxford EQ, which I like. So I've removed anything below 20 Hertz. I've given a little boost around 50 Hertz, which is the sort of kick drum. Well, no, not the kick drum. It will be the kick drum in a trance track, but the bass area where you want the bass, big bass sound. And I've given it a little boost around 1,500 Hertz. And again around 4,000 Hertz, just to bring out a bit of sort of crispness on the vocals and some of the synths. The next thing I've done is used PSP Vintage Warmer 2, which is like a multi-band compressor, but also adds sort of a bit of, not grit, that's the wrong word, but warmth to a track. I've used a preset called Mix Finalize 2, but I've also tweaked it as well. I've reduced the amount of drive and I've fiddled with a couple of things. I've used MSED, the Voxengo, which is a free plugin. It's the mid-side processor, and I've just basically used it a bit. I suppose you could use binaural pan as well, maybe. I've just used it to increase the volume of the sides, so a bit more stereo. And then finally, a limiter. What I'll do, I'll show how each one affects the track. So this is what it sounds like with no mastering at all. Bring in the EQ. You can't really hear, you don't really want to be able to hear it. It's just something. Bring in PSP Vintage Warmer. And you can see that clip light came on because I had not put a limiter, so it will clip. That's why obviously a limiter is always the last thing in the train, because that will catch any peaks. Now you want to be careful when you're mastering. You don't want a horrible over-compressed, fatiguing sound. So I've used quite small, quite a small bit of limiting, really. 2 decibels of gain, but the gain reduction, even at the loudest point of the track, I mean, it never goes above sort of 2 decibels of gain reduction. So I then mastered that, bounced it down, brought it in here. You can see here, one of the good things about Studio One is it's got this loudness information, which gives you the dynamic range. And there's charts on the internet which show you exactly what this means. But a dynamic range of 10, I mean, that's good. That's got a lot of dynamic range. So you've got a lot of difference between the lowest volume parts of the track and the highest volume parts of the track. So if you listen to that on a stereo, you're going to get, it's really going to go from quiet to loud. My mastered version has got a dynamic range of 5, which if that was an acoustic song, it would sound pretty horrible probably, but in electronic music it works quite well. I don't like my stuff to go too loud. I mean, quite a lot of the tops are chopped off, but what you can't see is that they're not chopped off by that much, really. Now, one of the most important things to do, actually, I'll show you first of all what it sounds like before it was mastered and what it sounds like afterwards. And I use mastered in a very loose sense.
Maybe today. Maybe today.
Okay, so it's basically an increase in volume that I've got there. Now, one of the things which is really important to do when you're attempting to master something as an amateur like me is to use reference tracks to test your track against. And you want to use the best in the genre as well. You don't want to make yourself feel better by putting horrible tracks on there and your track sounds better than them, because that's not going to work in the long run. You've got to try, well, I always try and sort of strive to sound as good as I possibly can. I'm certainly not at the end of that journey yet. So what I used was a track called Whisper, which is a liquid drum and bass track by Blue Martin, the vocals of Kirsty Hawkshaw. I also used a track by Deadmau5 called Faxing Berlin, and a track called Blindside by Hybrid. So we've got liquid drum and bass, house, and breaks. So all I do is play my track, and then play their track, and go backwards and forwards and see how mine compares. Now, obviously, your track isn't going to sound exactly the same because it's a different track. You've got different instruments. But what I suppose I'm looking for is volume, but also clarity, depth, stereo width, sound quality, how compressed it sounds compared to those other tracks. And as well as my ears, I will also use a spectrum meter, because you can look at a good track and you can see. In fact, there's a line built in, isn't there, on the spectrometer? It wants to follow a line, something like that.
In the shadow of a doubt, I need some sun. It seems the time like in days of old, waiting round the ever.
And you can see that my track and the other tracks, they do roughly follow that line. So in the track here, you've got the kick drum or the bass peaking around 50 hertz. And then the same in my track. So I know that I'm in the ballpark and I'm happy with how the mix sounds. And again, the next stage is to bounce that down, go and take it back out to the car, put it on your phone and listen to it over headphones and see how it sounds. Once you're happy with how it sounds compared to pro tracks or reference tracks that you respect, once you're happy how it sounds on your own monitoring system, in your car, on your headphones, on your CD player, that's the time that you then want to send it off to a label. And when I send stuff off to a label, I'll send an unmastered WAV. So this track, this version here, which is completely unmastered, and I'll send that as a 24-bit WAV, and then I'll also send a 320k MP3 of my rough master. So that is it. I hope it's useful. If you've got any questions, please feel free to ask. If there's anything you'd like me to do differently next time, please let me know. I'm intending to do further tutorials on progressive house, progressive trance, maybe some breaks and some sort of left field electronica. So thank you for listening, and I hope it was useful. Goodbye.